In a world ruled by blood and prophecy, Aurelia Sterling is a seer haunted by a singular, terrifying vision: her own death at the hands of Alpha King Gregory Bastian. An ancient edict declares the king must secure his reign by the blood of his destined mate. For Gregory, it is a dreadful duty. For Aurelia, it is a death sentence. But when they finally meet, the unthinkable happens. The mate bond snaps into place, undeniable and absolute. He is the man fated to kill her, but he is also the man fated to love her. And in a world of savage magic and dark conspiracies, their fated bond might be the only thing that can save them, or the very thing that destroys them both. Chapter 1: The Seer's Nightmare. The cold was the first thing. A biting, invasive cold that clung to her skin through the thin fabric of her shift. Pine needles whipped her face as she ran. Her bare feet, already numb, stumbled over frozen roots and sharp stones. Her breath plumed in the frigid air, each gasp a painful tear in her lungs. She didn't dare look back. She could feel him. A howl tore through the night, closer this time. It was not the desperate cry of a lone wolf. This howl was steeped in raw, dominant authority. It was a command. It was a sentence. It rattled her bones and made her stumble, her ankle twisting painfully. She knew it was useless to run. She always ran, and he always caught her. Aurelia scrambled forward, her palms scraping against the icy earth. She tripped, sprawling onto a patch of snow-dusted ground. She tried to rise, but a shadow fell over her. It was immense, blocking out the fractured moonlight. He was no longer a wolf. He was a man. She rolled over, gasping, and stared up at her executioner. He was a silhouette of power, his shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the kingdom. She couldn't see his face, hidden as it was in the deep shadows of the ancient forest. But she could feel the inferno of his gaze. He smelled of winter, of pine, and of something that, in a cruel twist of fate, inexplicably felt like home. He knelt beside her, his presence suffocating. He raised his hand. Not a claw, but a hand holding a gleaming silver dagger, its edge whispering in the still air. "It is the only way," his voice rumbled, a sound like an avalanche, full of gravel and reluctant sorrow. She could only whisper one word, the same word as always. Why? The prophecy demands it. He plunged the dagger down. Aurelia Sterling shot upright in her narrow cot, a scream trapped in her throat. Sweat drenched her nightgown, the rough sheets clinging to her skin. She was safe. She was not in the snow. She was in her cramped, cold dormitory room at Ironwood Academy. The familiar scent of old stone and floor polish filled her lungs. But the dream felt more real than the stone walls around her. It was always the same. The chase, the shadow, the dagger, and the man. Alpha King Gregory Bastian, the man she had never met, yet whose face she knew better than her own. She shoved her trembling legs out of bed and crossed to the small, cracked mirror. Her reflection stared back, pale and haunted. Silver eyes, the only remaining mark of her lineage, looked too large for her face. House Sterling, a name that once commanded respect, but was now whispered with pity, or worse, contempt. A fallen house. Aurelia splashed icy water from the basin onto her face, trying to wash away the phantom chill. It was all because of the prophecy. Every shifter in every territory knew the burden the Bastion line carried. The king must secure his reign and spare his realm by the blood of his destined mate. Generations had interpreted it in only one way: a ritual sacrifice. The mate, when found, must be executed. A brutal, necessary price to keep the rogue threat at bay and ensure the kingdom's prosperity. For most, it was a somber, tragic myth. For Aurelia, it was a nightly torment. Her seer abilities, the very magic that had once made House Sterling great, were now her private curse. They didn't just show her a king, they showed her the king. And they showed him killing her. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold ran down her spine. The other girls in the dormitory were already stirring, their whispers filtering through the thin walls. Not about her, not today. Today, the entire academy was consumed by a different anxiety. Aurelia clutched the edge of the wash basin, her knuckles white. She knew why everyone was frantic. She knew why the academy's grounds were being meticulously groomed and patrolled by the king's own guard. He was coming. Alpha King Gregory Bastion was arriving at Ironwood Academy today. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. Her dream killer, her executioner, her fated mate. She had to hide. She had to find a way to be invisible. If he saw her, if he looked at her, and felt even a whisper of what she felt in the dream, it was over. How could you hide from a king? How could you hide from destiny itself? A sharp, authoritative rap on her door made her jump, her breath catching. "Aurelia Sterling," a sharp voice called. It was Lyra, the pack prefect. "Headmaster's orders. You're to be on the welcoming detail, front and center." Chapter 2. The King at Ironwood Front and Center. The two words echoed in Aurelia's mind like a death knell. It was a cruel joke. For 2 years at Ironwood, her status as the last of a fallen house had been a shroud of invisibility. She was relegated to the back of classrooms, the end of assembly lines, the forgotten corners of the dining hall. She had cultivated that invisibility, cherished it as her only defense. Now, on the one day her life depended on it, she was to be exposed. She moved as if in a trance, her feet leaden. The academy's central courtyard was already packed. Students, dressed in their formal gray uniforms, were arranged in rigid, anxious lines. A pathway was cleared down the middle, leading to the Great Hall's main entrance. Aurelia found herself placed in the very first row, her proximity to the path sickening. She could smell the polish on the guards' boots, the ozone of the high-level alphas lining the perimeter. A heavy, unnatural silence fell over the courtyard. The usual chatter of the academy was gone, replaced by a collective, held breath. And then they heard it. The rhythmic, pounding crunch of boots on the gravel path outside the gates. Not a legion, but a small, terrifyingly precise group. He appeared. The man from her dreams was no longer a shadow. He was substance, and he was overwhelming. Alpha King Gregory Bastion was a physical force, a living storm of power that seemed to suck the very air from the courtyard. He was dressed in a severe black military uniform, the silver crest of House Bastion gleaming on his collar. He was taller than she'd imagined, his shoulders broader. His dark hair was cut short, his jaw set in a line of brutal, weary control. He was not a king who reveled in his power. He was one who was burdened by it. His gaze was the worst part. His storm gray eyes were cold, sharp, and restless. They swept the crowd with an intensity that felt like a physical search. He was not just looking. He was hunting. Aurelia's blood turned to ice. She instinctively tried to shrink, to make herself small, tucking her head down and partially hiding behind the taller, broader shoulders of the boy next to her. She held her breath, willing herself to be a stone, a leaf, anything but a person. He walked past, flanked by his guards. Aurelia's eyes darted to the man at his right, Lord Caspian, his chief advisor, an older wolf with a placid, almost gentle face and silvering hair. He seemed to be the only one unaffected by the king's tense aura. Gregory paused, not even 10 feet from her. He stopped walking. Aurelia's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought it would break. He frowned, his head tilting slightly, as if catching a scent on the wind. That scent? Her scent. She prayed for the wind to change. He scanned the front row, his gaze brushing over her. She felt the electrical heat of it, a burn that seared her skin even through her uniform. For a fraction of a second, his eyes narrowed in confusion? Recognition? Then Lord Caspian murmured something, and the moment was broken. The king continued on, sweeping into the great hall. The students were herded in behind him, a silent, shuffling mass. Aurelia found herself trapped in the middle of the crowd, her escape routes cut off. She was in a room with the man who haunted her sleep. The great oak doors of the hall swung shut behind them with a heavy final thud. There was no escape. Chapter 3. The Bond That Binds. The air in the great hall was thick enough to choke on. The vaulted ceilings, usually so grand, now felt oppressive, like the inside of a tomb. Gregory Bastion stood on the raised dais, a thundercloud of raw authority. He was not listening to the headmaster's fawning welcome speech. His gray eyes were in motion again, detached from the proceedings, engaged in that same relentless personal hunt. Aurelia was rooted in the center of the hall, surrounded. She kept her head bowed, her gaze fixed on the polished stone floor. Do not look at him. Do not draw his eye. Be invisible. Be nothing. She could feel his focus moving over the crowd, a palpable weight that made her skin prickle. She could feel it getting closer. She recited the names of ancient, forgotten constellations in her mind, a desperate mantra to anchor herself. He was scanning her row. She could feel the heat of his proximity. Her inner wolf, which had been cowering, was now acting strangely. It was not afraid. It was alert, expectant. It was pacing the confines of her mind, drawn by a force she couldn't name. Look. The command didn't come from him. It came from within her, from the deepest, most primal part of her soul. Look. She resisted. She kept her eyes down, her hands clenched at her sides, her nails biting into her palms. Look. It was no longer a request. It was a physical compulsion, an invisible string tied to her chin, pulling it up. Slowly, against every instinct of self-preservation, she lifted her head. Her silver eyes, the mark of her fallen house, met his storm-gray ones across the suffocating silence of the hall. The world ended. It was not a spark, it was a cataclysm. A physical blow slammed into her chest, stealing her breath. The headmaster's voice, the shuffling of the students, the very air itself, it all vanished. There was only him. A jolt of agonizing, brilliant energy seared the space between them. It was recognition on a cellular level. It was the universe snapping two broken halves of a soul back into place. Mate. The word bloomed in her mind, not as a thought, but as an irrefutable divine truth. His composure shattered. He took a sharp, audible gasp of air, his body recoiling as if he too had been struck. His eyes widened, the hard mask of the king replaced by a flash of raw, unfiltered shock. He knew. He saw her. He knew who she was. And in that same terrible instant, Aurelia understood. The nightmare wasn't a random vision. The prophecy wasn't a hypothetical. The woman he was fated to kill, it was her. The universe had not just cursed her. It had made her destiny's ultimate, cruel joke. She was fated to love the man who was fated to kill her. The sounds of the hall rushed back in. The headmaster faltered, his speech dying in his throat. The silence was complete, because the king was no longer looking at him. He was standing, his oaken chair scraping loudly on the stone dais. He was staring directly, unequivocally at her. Every single student, every professor, every royal guard turned. They followed the rigid, unblinking line of their king's gaze, their eyes landing on the one person who had captured his absolute, horrified attention. Aurelia Sterling was exposed. Chapter 4. A King's Cold Shoulder. Aurelia stood pinned, the focus of 1,000 eyes. The seconds stretched into an eternity. In Gregory's gaze, she saw a war. She saw the shock of recognition, the searing heat of the bond, and then, warring against it, a cold, dreadful understanding. A shadow passed over his face. The duty, the prophecy. He was going to do it. He was going to denounce her. Call her out in front of them all. Name her as the cursed mate, the realm's sacrifice. Her knees locked, bracing for the verdict. Then, he blinked. The king's mask slammed back into place. His features, which had been so alive with shock, hardened into an expression of chilling indifference. He clenched his jaw. He turned away. The agonizing, brilliant thread of the mate bond that had flared between them was not just dropped, it was severed. The rejection was a physical wrench, a violent tearing that left her soul cold and bleeding. She gasped, a small wounded sound, as if she'd been physically struck. Gregory turned to the stunned headmaster. "My apologies." His voice was a low growl, devoid of all emotion. A momentary distraction. He didn't look at her again. He didn't have to. The message was clear. He spoke a few more curt, dismissive words, cutting the assembly short. "The tour. At once." He did not wait for a reply. He swept off the dais and stalked out of the great hall, his black-clad guards, Lord Caspian included, moving in his wake like shadows. The moment the doors closed behind him, the dam of silence broke. A tidal wave of whispers erupted. "Who is she?" "The Sterling girl. The one with no family." "What did she do?" He looked like he wanted to kill her. Or claim her. "Don't be absurd. She's a nobody." Aurelia was frozen, her face burning with a humiliation so profound it eclipsed her fear. This was worse. He hadn't just seen her, he had recognized her, and in front of the entire academy, he had rejected her. He had made his choice. He would follow the prophecy. But first he would let the world know that she was nothing to him. She fled. She shoved her way through the knots of whispering students, ignoring their stares and pointed fingers. She ran from the hall, down the corridors, and didn't stop until she was back in her own dormitory. She spent the rest of the day in her room, a pariah. She skipped her lessons. She skipped the evening meal. The whispers had followed her. She was no longer invisible. She was the king's distraction. The girl who had, for one insane moment, held the Alpha King's attention. Night fell. She sat in the dark, her bag on her bed. She was resolved. She had to leave. Run, just like in her dream. But this time she would run for real. She would not be a sacrifice. She was shoving her last tunic into the bag when a sound made her freeze. A soft scratch. She went utterly still, her ears straining. It came again. Scratch. Scratch. It was coming from her window. Aurelia's blood ran cold. She stared at the window, her heart in her throat. Her room was on the 3rd floor. Chapter 5. The Midnight Confession. The latch on her window clicked. Aurelia snatched the heaviest object within reach, a thick, leather-bound volume on territorial law. She scrambled back, her heart hammering against her ribs as the window slowly slid upward from the outside. A dark-gloved hand gripped the sill. A moment later, a massive, dark-clad figure swung from the eaves of the roof and landed with a soundless, predatory grace inside her tiny room. The moonlight framed him. Alpha King Gregory Bastion. He was no longer in his formal uniform, but in black fatigues. He straightened to his full, imposing height, and her dorm room, already small, seemed to shrink to the size of a matchbox. "Get out!" Aurelia hissed, her voice trembling. She hefted the book, her only weapon. "Have you come to finish it? To do it quietly where no one can see?" "Be silent," he commanded, but the voice was not the cold, public growl of the king. It was strained, raw, and desperate. He pulled his gloves off, his hands restless. In the dim light, she could see he was not the calm, collected ruler from the assembly. He was haunted. "Do you think you're the only one?" he bit out, his voice low. Aurelia's fear faltered, replaced by a surge of bitter anger. "The only one what? The only one you've terrified? The only one you've publicly humiliated?" He stalked forward, and the room was so small he was suddenly, overwhelmingly there. The mate bond, which he had so brutally severed in the hall, roared back to life, an agonizing magnetic pull that demanded she step into his arms. He was visibly fighting it, his entire body rigid with the effort. "The dreams," he said, his voice a low rasp. "You think you're the only one who has them?" The textbook slipped from her grasp and hit the floor with a dull thud. "What? What do you mean?" He turned away, pacing the 2 steps her room allowed. He looked like a wolf in a cage. "Every night, For a year. A forest I don't recognize. I'm running. He dragged a hand through his hair. I'm hunting. I smell pine and frost. And you. He stopped and looked at his own hands with a look of profound self-loathing. I catch you, you're on the ground, and I have a dagger. He met her eyes, and the pain in his was a mirror of her own. And I kill you. Aurelia sank onto her cot, her legs giving out. He wasn't just her executioner. He was a prisoner too. He had been dreaming of killing his own mate. Today, he continued, his voice rough, when I was in the hall, I smelled it, the scent from the dream. I looked, and I saw you. He shook his head, a look of pained disbelief. It was you, my mate. He spat the word like a curse. When I turned away, I wasn't rejecting you, Aurelia. I was trying to save you. From me. He had called her by her name. How? She whispered. How can this be? Gregory stepped close again, kneeling so he was eye level with her. His gray eyes burned with a new, terrifying intensity. Because they are not just dreams, not just simple visions of the future. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that chilled her to the bone. They are his visions, not ours. Someone is showing them to us, Aurelia. Someone is in our heads. Someone wants the prophecy to be fulfilled. Chapter 6. Bound by a Curse. Aurelia's mind reeled. Someone was in their heads. The nightmare that had defined her life wasn't a warning from fate. It was a threat from an enemy. The man kneeling in front of her wasn't her fated killer. He was her fellow victim. The knowledge changed everything. The fear that had kept her frozen gave way to a white-hot, clarifying anger. Who? She whispered, her voice shaking. Who would do this? I don't know, Gregory admitted, and the confession seemed torn from him. But they are powerful. To infiltrate a king's mind, to plant a vision so strong it feels like prophecy. This is not common magic. The mate bond, no longer suppressed by her terror, surged between them, a desperate living thing in the tiny room. It filled the air, thick with unspoken need and a profound, terrifying recognition. Gregory's gaze dropped to her mouth, and she felt his inner wolf pressing against his control. He was so close. The scent of pine and winter from her dreams was real, and it was his. He raised a hand, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was an inferno. A jolt of pure energy arced between them, and Aurelia gasped. Gregory recoiled, snatching his hand back as if he'd been burned. He stood, putting distance between them. That, he growled, his voice rough, is why this is so dangerous. He began to pace again, a caged alpha. This bond, they are counting on it. They show us the horror. They show us the prophecy, and then they throw us together. They want me to find you, and they want me to believe the only way to save my people is to... He couldn't say the words. To kill me, Aurelia finished for him, her voice flat. His eyes snapped to hers, flint gray and burning. I will not. The words were a vow, an oath of iron. I will not be a puppet. He crossed to the window. In public, I will continue to ignore you. You are to be nothing to me. It is the only way I can keep you safe, to make you seem unimportant to whoever is watching. And in private? She asked, rising from the cot, feeling a new, fragile strength. Gregory paused, his hand on the window latch. In private, you are my mate, and you are my only ally. He looked back at her, the king's mask firmly in place, but his eyes were raw. You are a seer. Your visions are the only weapon we have that they don't know about. They think they're controlling you with nightmares, but you can see more. I can try, she said. Good. He prepared to leave. Do not speak of this to anyone, not your friends, not the professors. Trust no one, especially not my council. How will I see you? I will find you. He swung one leg out the window and paused. He didn't look back. Stay safe, Aurelia. He was gone. The cold night air swirled into the room, but it was nothing compared to the chill of his warning. She was allied with the king, bound to him by a force neither of them could control, and hunted by a shadow they couldn't even name. She locked the window, her hand trembling. Trust no one. The isolation felt as cold and sharp as the dagger from her dream. Chapter 7. Stolen Moments. The next 2 weeks were a study in agonizing duality. By day, Aurelia Sterling was a ghost, exactly as Gregory had commanded. She endured the whispers and the hostile stares, a pariah who had somehow, briefly, caught the king's eye and been just as quickly dismissed. He was a cold, distant mountain of authority, inspecting troops at the academy, meeting with the headmaster, his face a mask of iron. He never once looked her way. The public rejection was so convincing it sometimes chilled her to the bone, making her doubt their midnight pact. But by night, he was hers. He kept his word. He found her. A quiet summons left in her textbook. A prearranged signal. A single guard moved from his post. Their meetings were fleeting, stolen in the most forgotten corners of Ironwood. The astronomy tower, beneath a blanket of silent stars. The dusty, echoing depths of the restricted library. Once, huddled in the cold shadows of an abandoned stable, the scent of old hay and leather around them. In these moments, the king vanished, and Gregory emerged. He was weary, sharp-witted, and carried a burden that visibly weighed on his soul. He shared his frustrations. She shared her fragments. "The rogue attacks are worse," he murmured one night, his broad back against the ancient stone of the library wall. "They're too smart. They hit supply lines we'd just established. They're avoiding our patrols as if they have our schedules." "The dreams have stopped," Aurelia countered, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Ever since that night in my room. The nightmare is gone. But my visions, they're different, unclear, just flashes." "What kind of flashes?" He turned to her, his focus absolute. "Smoke," she whispered, closing her eyes. "Fire, the tang of blood, and a sound. A low, guttural chanting. It's not our language." He watched her, his gaze intense. "Dark magic." "I think so." She met his eyes, and the air crackled. This was the hardest part. The proximity. The bond thrummed between them. A low, constant hum that demanded they close the small distance. They were allies, but they were also mate and mate. The longing was a physical ache. "They're getting bolder," he said, his voice dropping. "Another village was hit. Stonebrook, near the eastern ridge. It was supposed to be a secret refuge under my personal protection. Only my inner council knew of it." Aurelia's head snapped up. "A leak." "Yes." His face was grim. "I have a traitor on my council." A cold dread washed over her. The enemy wasn't just outside the gates. He was inside. He was standing right next to the king. Suddenly, a new sound intruded. Heavy boots. The thud-thud-thud of a guard patrol coming their way, much earlier than scheduled. Gregory reacted instantly. He grabbed her, his arm like a steel band around her waist. He didn't make a sound, simply pulled her backward, deep into the narrow, unlit gap between two towering bookshelves. They were pressed together in the pitch black, chest to chest. She could feel the solid, thumping beat of his heart against hers. His breath was hot on her temple. The bond flared, a silent, blazing supernova in the dark, and she had to bite her lip to keep from making a sound as the guards passed their hiding place. Chapter 8. The Conspiracy in Shadows. The near discovery in the library left them both shaken. Gregory's security was compromised, and the risk of their secret meetings had become too great. He left the academy the next day, a grim, formal departure that left Aurelia feeling utterly alone. He had returned to the capital, leaving her surrounded by potential enemies. Her only purpose now was to see. She threw herself into her research, haunting the library. But this time, she wasn't looking for prophecy. She was looking for any mention of dark magic, of mental infiltration, of the guttural language from her flashes. The other students gave her a wide berth. The king's distraction had become the academy's resident ghoul. The vision hit her not in the library, but in the sterile quiet of the potions lab. She was measuring dried wolfsbane, the bitter scent sharp in her nose, when the room dissolved. She was no longer in the lab. She was in a cold, pine-filled forest. Her forest. The nightmare. But this time, she was not running. She was an observer, hidden in the trees. Below her, in a small clearing, was a group of rogues. They were larger than any she had ever seen, their fur matted, their eyes glowing with a faint, sickly green light. They were waiting. They were anxious. Then, she heard it. The chanting. It was coming from the center of the group, where a cloaked figure stood. His back was to her. He was holding a small carved object, a piece of dark, jagged stone. The magic poured from him, a tangible, oily sickness that made her stomach turn. The rogues were under his control. She tried to push, to see his face, to understand. Who was he? As if he'd heard her thoughts, the man spoke. His voice was low, and it was not the chanting. It was normal. The king's scouts will be here by dawn. You will let 2 of them escape. They must report what they see. The rest are yours. Aurelia's blood ran cold. This wasn't a random attack. This was the Stonebrook massacre. This was the leak. She pushed harder, desperate to see the traitor. Turn around. Turn around. The vision fractured. The cloaked man stiffened, as if he sensed her. He began to turn his head. She saw the edge of a jaw, a silvering of hair at his temple, and then a blinding pain exploded behind her eyes. Aurelia collapsed, the glass beaker of wolfsbane shattering on the stone floor. She came to with a gasp, her fellow students staring at her in alarm. "She just fainted," one of them whispered. "Get a prefect." Aurelia ignored them. She scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. It was a trap. Gregory's scouts had been meant to escape. They weren't just being outsmarted. They were being used. She stumbled from the lab, leaning heavily on the wall. She had to warn him. She had to get a message to the capital. She knew what she had seen. A cloaked figure, a silvering at the temple. It was not a perfect image, but it was a start. She knew something. She was finally fighting back. Chapter 9. The advisor's face. Getting a message to the king was harder than she could have imagined. Every dispatch from the academy was read. Every raven was logged. She was a student, and a pariah at that. She had no access. For 3 days, she was trapped with her fragment of a vision, her frustration mounting to a fever pitch. She was the king's only ally, and she was useless. Relief came from an unexpected source. Princess Freya. Gregory's younger sister arrived at the academy unannounced, on the pretense of inspecting the women's dormitories. She was sharp, observant, and moved with a quiet authority that belied her rank. She found Aurelia in the dining hall, sitting alone. Freya simply sat opposite her. "My brother is a fool," she said, her voice too low for anyone else to hear. "But he is not a subtle one. He hasn't stopped thinking about you since he left." Aurelia's head snapped up. "You know?" "I know he met a girl who scrambled his senses, and I know he returned to the capital and immediately began a private investigation into his own council. He's trusting no one, except, it seems, you." Freya slid a small sealed parchment across the table. "You have 1 hour. I'll have this in his hand by dawn tomorrow." Aurelia wrote everything. The vision, the cloaked man, the green-eyed rogues, the dark magic, the silvering hair. She poured all her fear and certainty onto the page. She spent the next few days in a fog of anxiety. Then the vision came again. It was daytime. She was walking across the main courtyard when a voice, placid and kind, called her name. "Miss Sterling, a moment." She turned. Lord Caspian stood there, his hands clasped behind his back, a gentle, almost grandfatherly smile on his face. "I was a great admirer of your grandfather, you know. House Sterling was a pillar of this kingdom. It is a shame to see it so reduced." His voice. It was smooth, cultured. It was unfamiliar. The man in her vision had been rasping, low. This couldn't be him. She felt a wave of confused relief. "You honor me, my lord," she murmured, dipping her head. "I only hope," he continued, his eyes crinkling at the corners, "that the king's recent attention has not given you false hope. He is a man of duty. He understands what the prophecy demands." A cold tendril of fear snaked down her spine. I don't know what you mean." "Of course you don't," he said, his smile never wavering. "But a word of advice from an old man. Destiny is an ocean, and it is far better to drown quickly than to fight the tide." He nodded, a polite, chilling dismissal, and walked on. That night, the vision returned. It was the same clearing, the same rogues, the same cloaked man. But this time, Aurelia was prepared. She didn't push. She just watched. She waited. The man finished his orders. He turned to leave the clearing, his hood falling back for just a moment as he looked up at the moon. The face was not gentle. It was not kind. It was hard, ruthless, and filled with a cold ambition. But it was, without a shadow of a doubt, the face of Lord Caspian. The man in the vision was him. He was a master of deception, a traitor hiding behind a grandfatherly mask. Aurelia's breath hitched. She wasn't just observing. She was there. And in that moment, he sensed her. His head snapped toward her hiding place, his eyes narrowing in the dark. He couldn't see her, but he felt her. "Who is there?" he snarled, his voice no longer smooth, but a harsh, guttural rasp. The voice from the vision. Chapter 10. A King's Doubt. Aurelia ripped herself from the vision with a suffocating gasp, collapsing onto her cot. Her heart was a trapped bird. He had felt her. The most dangerous man in the kingdom, the spider at the center of the web, knew that someone was watching. She had to tell Gregory. Not with a letter, but in person. It took her 2 days to slip out of Ironwood. She used the last of her family's meager funds to bribe a cart driver, hiding among barrels of salted fish, every jolt of the road a spike of paranoia. She arrived at the capital, a sprawling fortress of gray stone, and was met with an impenetrable wall of steel and bureaucracy. She was a no-name girl from a fallen house. She couldn't get near the king. Desperate, she used the one name she had. "Princess Freya, tell her Aurelia Sterling is here." It was a gamble, but it worked. Hours later, Freya smuggled her into the castle through a servant's entrance, her eyes wide with alarm. "What has happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have," Aurelia said, her voice hoarse. "I've seen the traitor. I have to see Gregory." Freya led her to the king's private solar. Gregory was there, bent over a map, his brow furrowed. When he saw her, he went rigid. "Aurelia? What are you doing here? It's not safe." "It's Caspian," she burst out, the words tumbling from her. "Lord Caspian is the traitor. I saw him. He's controlling the rogues with dark magic. He staged the Stonebrook massacre. He's been manipulating everything. He's the one who wants you to kill me." She expected shock, relief, anything but what she got. Silence. Gregory's face, which had been alive with surprise, went cold. He straightened to his full height, and the ally from the library vanished, replaced by the king. "Caspian?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "Yes, I saw him. In a vision. His face. I heard his voice." "His voice," Gregory repeated, his tone flat. "It was him, Gregory. I'm sure of it." "No." The word was a hammer blow. "Absolutely not. He served my father for 30 years. He raised me after my mother died." He stalked toward her, his eyes blazing with a cold, violent denial. "He is the most loyal man I have ever known. You are wrong." Aurelia flinched, but she stood her ground. "I am not wrong. He's playing you. He has 2 faces, 2 voices. The man I saw—" "The man you saw," Gregory interrupted, "was in a vision, a dream, a flash from a girl whose family has a history of instability." The words hit her like a physical slap. He had used her fallen house against her, the one person she trusted. "You asked me to see," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You told me it was our only weapon. And I told you to trust no one," he roared, his control snapping. "You come here to the heart of my castle with an accusation that could start a civil war based on a nightmare? You accuse the man who is like a father to me?" He was torn. She could see it. The man who loved her versus the king who loved his father figure. And the king was winning. "Bring me proof," he snarled, his eyes as hard and cold as the stone walls. "Bring me something more than a feeling. Bring me a witness, a letter, anything real. I am a king. I cannot destroy my most loyal advisor on the word of a seer from a fallen house." He turned his back on her, a gesture of absolute, heartbreaking dismissal. "Now get out of my castle. You are not safe here, and you are not welcome." Chapter 11. The Lion's Den. Aurelia was left in the corridor, the heavy solar door clicking shut. The slam was as final as a prison gate. He hadn't just rejected her. He had called her unstable. He had used her fallen house, her family's legacy, as a weapon against her. The man who had vowed to be her ally had turned his back, leaving her completely exposed. The betrayal was a cold, sharp blade in her gut. But beneath the pain, a desperate, feral anger began to burn. Gregory had demanded proof. He had demanded something real. He wouldn't listen to her in private, so she would give him no choice in public. If she was going to be hunted, if Caspian already knew she was a threat, then hiding was no longer an option. Her only chance was to bring the truth into the light, no matter how blinding. She knew the King's Council was in session. She had passed the great chamber on her way to the solar. She could hear the low murmur of voices from within. It was suicide. It was madness. And it was all she had left. She walked, not ran, toward the council chamber doors. The two guards stationed outside, clad in the silver and black of House Bastion, moved to block her. "The council is in session. You are not permitted." "The king will see me," she said, channeling a sliver of the authority she was fated to hold. Before they could grab her, she shoved past them and threw the heavy oak doors open. The room went silent. 20 of the most powerful alphas in the kingdom stared at her, their private debate cut short. Gregory was at the head of the massive table, his face a mask of thunder. And there, to his right, sat Lord Caspian, his expression one of gentle, grandfatherly concern. "Aurelia." Gregory's voice was a low warning, a growl that promised consequences. "I told you to—" "You told me to bring you proof," she cried out, her voice echoing in the cavernous, silent room. She pointed a trembling finger directly at the king's advisor. "And I am telling this council, Lord Caspian is a traitor." A wave of indrawn breaths, of shocked and outraged mutters, swept the room. "Insolence!" one lord roared. "She's mad!" Aurelia ignored them, her eyes locked on Caspian, who was watching her with a look of profound, calculated pity. "He is the one controlling the rogues," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "He is using dark magic to orchestrate the attacks, to destabilize the kingdom, to force your hand. I saw him. He's the one who staged the Stonebrook massacre. He is the enemy you have been hunting." The room erupted. Lords surged to their feet, shouting her down, demanding her arrest. "Blasphemy! Seize the girl!" Through it all, Lord Caspian sat, his face a mask of sorrow. He raised a hand, and the room slowly, reluctantly, fell silent. He turned his kind eyes not to Aurelia, but to his king. "My liege," he said, his voice smooth and full of regret. "The poor child. It is as I feared. The fall of her house, the pressure of recent events. Her mind is clearly not her own. She has attached her fantasies to me." He turned to Aurelia, his voice dripping with false compassion. "My dear, you are unwell." He had painted her as hysterical, as a delusional, power-hungry girl, and in that room, full of old, powerful men, it was the easiest, most believable story. Aurelia looked at Gregory, her last hope. Gregory, please. You know me. You know what I can do. Don't let him. That is enough. Gregory's voice was dead. He stood, his face carved from ice. He looked not at her, but at the guards who had followed her in. The council is over. Escort Miss Sterling to her guest quarters. She is unwell, and is not to be permitted in the royal wing again. The betrayal was complete. He had publicly sided with his advisor. He had named her a liar. Lord Caspian watched her being taken, his eyes cold and triumphant. She was no longer a threat. She was just a mad girl. Chapter 12. The Traitor's Frame. Aurelia was a prisoner, though her cell was furnished with silk. The guest quarters were luxurious, but the door was locked from the outside, a guard posted down the hall. She was trapped. She had played her only card, and it had been a disastrous failure. She hadn't just failed to expose Caspian. She had given him all the power. He had the king's ear, the council's support, and now, the perfect excuse to dispose of her. She paced the room, the mate bond a dull, throbbing ache of rejection. Gregory hadn't believed her. He had seen the truth in her eyes and chosen to believe the lie. She knew Caspian wouldn't wait long. He couldn't. He had to cement his victory, to remove her from the board permanently. The blow fell the next morning. A commotion in the hall. An alarm. Shouts of treason and spy. Her door was unlocked and burst open. It was not Caspian, but Captain Valerius of the King's Guard, a man with a face like a closed fist. Gregory was behind him, his expression grim. And behind him, looking heartbroken, was Lord Caspian. "What is this?" Aurelia demanded, her heart sinking. "Search the room," Valerius snapped. The guards were brutal. They overturned her mattress, tore her meager travel bag apart, ripped tapestries from the wall. "My king," one of the guards called from the fireplace. He reached deep into the chimney flue and pulled out a small, oilskin-wrapped bundle. "What have you found?" Gregory asked, his voice lethally quiet. The guard unwrapped it. Inside was a detailed map of the royal grain routes, the very routes that had been ambushed just last week. Tucked in the map's fold was a small leather pouch. Valerius opened it, and a sulfuric, rotten smell filled the room, the dark powder of black magic. "This," Valerius said, "is the same substance found at the Stonebrook massacre." "It's a lie!" Aurelia screamed, her eyes finding Caspian. "He planted it. He put it there. Gregory, you know he's the traitor." Caspian looked at his king, his eyes wet with unshed tears. "My liege, I had so hoped it was just madness. But this is high treason." Aurelia looked at Gregory, pleading with her eyes. "See me. See the truth. Remember our bond. Remember the library. Remember your vow." He looked at the map. He looked at the black powder. And then, slowly, he looked at her. His face was a void. Every trace of the man who had climbed her window, the ally who had held her in the dark, was gone. There was only the king. "Aurelia Sterling," he said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "You are hereby charged with high treason and conspiracy with the enemy. Seize her. Take her to the cells." The guards grabbed her arms. She fought, but she was weak. "No, Gregory, don't do this. He's lying to you. He's the one. Gregory." He turned his back as they dragged her from the room. Chapter 13. The King's Betrayal. The dungeons were a shock of cold, damp stone after the guest quarters. The scent of mildew, straw, and old despair filled her lungs. They threw her into a cell, the iron bars slamming shut with a sound of utter finality. She was done. She had lost. The man she was fated to love, the man who was her other half, had just condemned her. He believed the frame-up. He had chosen the word of his advisor over the frantic, desperate truth of his own mate. The bond was a cruel, burning shackle, linking her to the man who was about to sign her death warrant. Hours passed, or perhaps a day. Time was a blur of shadows and the distant dripping of water. She was lost in a fog of despair when footsteps echoed in the corridor. Not the heavy thud of guards, a lighter, measured tread. Lord Caspian appeared out of the darkness, his face illuminated by a single torch. The kind, grandfatherly mask was gone. In its place was a look of cold, reptilian satisfaction. "You really are a fool, little seer," he whispered, his voice the same harsh rasp she'd heard in her vision. "You," she breathed, scrambling to her feet, clutching the bars. "Me." He smiled, a thin, bloodless expression. "Did you truly think your pretty face and a fated bond could unravel a plan 30 years in the making? I was guiding this kingdom before you were born." "Why?" she choked out. "Why do this to him? He loves you. He trusts you." "He is weak," Caspian snarled, his civility gone. "He, like his father, believes in mercy, in understanding. This kingdom was built on strength, on the culling of the weak. The prophecy is the key. The king must spill the blood of his mate. It is a sacrifice. It will forge him in fire, make him the ruthless, iron-fisted ruler we need. You want him to kill me." "Of course. And now he will. Oh, not as a mate, but as a traitor. The effect will be the same. The realm will see him pass sentence on the one he was fated for. They will see his duty conquer his heart. It will make him a legend." He leaned closer. "You should have stayed invisible." He left her in the dark. The next day, she was dragged back to the council chamber. It was not a discussion, it was a sentencing. Gregory sat on the throne, his face like granite. "Aurelia Sterling," he began, his voice booming, "you have been found guilty of high treason. The evidence is absolute." She looked at him, her heart shattering. "Don't do this. Please, Gregory. See me." He looked up, and his eyes finally met hers. They were dead, cold, empty, and final. He was a stranger. "For your crimes against the crown and in league with our enemies," he declared, his voice ringing with absolute regal authority, "you will be confined to the high tower to await your public trial. The verdict is guilty. The only sentence is death." Chapter 14. The Gilded Cage. The high tower was a step up from the dungeon, but a cage all the same. The room was circular, the single window barred. She was truly alone, high above the city, a spectacle for the crows. The betrayal was so complete it had hollowed her out, leaving nothing but a cold, aching void where the bond used to be. Caspian had won. Gregory had believed him. She was going to die. 2 nights passed. She ate nothing. She did nothing but stare at the bars, waiting for the executioner. On the 3rd night, she heard a sound. Not the heavy bolt of the guard's door, but the quiet, metallic snick of a key in the lock. She pressed herself against the far wall, her heart leaping. A small, cloaked figure slipped inside and bolted the door. The figure lowered her hood. "Princess Freya." Aurelia's voice was a rough croak. "We don't have much time," Freya said, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "Are you hurt?" "Hurt?" Aurelia's despair turned to a bitter, hysterical laugh. "Your brother just signed my death warrant. He believes Caspian. He called me a traitor. He left me to rot." "You fool," Freya snapped, crossing the room and grabbing Aurelia's arms. "He's protecting you." Aurelia stared at her, uncomprehending. "What?" "Think, Aurelia. Use that seer's brain. The moment you accused Caspian in the council, you were a dead woman. Caspian would have had you poisoned, stabbed in a corridor, or accidentally killed by a rogue arrow. He couldn't let you live. The only place he couldn't get to you was in official custody." "But the evidence." He believed it. "He knew it was planted," Freya hissed. "He saw the look on Caspian's face. He knew. But he had no proof. The council was with Caspian. If he had defended you, they would have turned on him, called him weak or worse, your co-conspirator. Caspian would have staged a coup within the hour." Aurelia's mind was spinning. So the dungeon, the trial, was a show. By publicly arresting you as a traitor, he's playing Caspian's game. He's made you a public spectacle. Now Caspian has to wait for a public trial. He can't just murder you, and that, Aurelia, is a trial Gregory will control. He's only pretending to be Caspian's puppet. He's buying you time." The love she thought was dead, the bond she thought was severed, roared back to life, a painful, brilliant flood. He hadn't betrayed her. He had saved her. "He sent me," Freya said, her eyes gleaming in the dark. "He's back in the solar, tearing apart 30 years of Caspian's records, looking for the proof. He's doing his part." She pulled a dark, heavy cloak from under her own. "Now we do ours." "What are we doing?" "He can't get you out, but I can." Freya smiled, a sharp, feral grin. "Gregory is investigating the man. You and we're going to investigate the prophecy. We're going to see the Oracle Alicia." Chapter 15. The Journey to the Oracle. The escape was a heart-stopping blur. Freya knew the castle's secrets, the hidden passages, the servants' stairs, the blind spots in the patrol routes. They moved like shadows, Aurelia's heart in her throat with every distant shout, every clanging bit of steel. Freya was risking everything. This was treason, plain and simple. They reached the stables, the air sharp with hay and horses. Freya had 2 saddled and waiting. "We ride northwest, and we don't stop till dawn," Freya ordered, swinging onto her horse. They burst from the stables and into the moonlit streets of the capital, their horses' hooves clattering on the cobblestones. They rode hard, past the city gates, where Freya's royal signet got them through with no questions, and out into the wild, open darkness. Aurelia didn't look back. She was a fugitive, the realm's most wanted traitor, on the run. For days they rode, avoiding main roads, sleeping in ditches, and eating what little food Freya had packed. The journey was brutal, but Aurelia felt a strange, fierce hope. Gregory was fighting for her. He was trusting her, even when he couldn't show it. Now, she had to find the truth that would save them both. "Why?" Aurelia asked one night, as they huddled by a small, smokeless fire. "Why are you risking this for me? For him?" Freya stared into the flames. "Caspian has had his claws in my brother for too long," she said quietly. "Gregory is a good king, but he's been blinded by a man he sees as a father. It's time someone opened his eyes." She gave a wry, humorless smile. "Besides, I've never liked that sanctimonious old goat." They reached the foothills of the Serpent's Tooth Mountains and began to climb. The Oracle Alicia did not live in a temple, but in the Whispering Glades, a place of ancient, primal magic that few could find. As they ascended, the air grew thin, and Aurelia felt her own seer magic thrumming, a low-level vibration that resonated with the ancient power of the mountains. After 2 more days of grueling travel, they found it. A hidden grove where the trees were ancient and white-barked, their leaves rustling with no wind. In the center sat a small, moss-covered hut. An ageless woman stood in the doorway, as if she had been waiting. Her eyes were a startling milky white. She was blind. "You are late, daughter of Sterling," the Oracle Asilia said. Her voice was like the rustling of dry leaves. "The king plays his game of shadows in the city, while you run from a fate you do not understand." The Oracle turned her blind, all-seeing gaze directly on Aurelia. "You have come to ask me about the prophecy. You believe you know the question, but you do not even know what the words mean." Chapter 16. The Blood of Life. Aurelia stepped into the moss-covered hut, Freya at her back. The air inside was warm, thick with the scent of drying herbs and something ancient, like ozone and dust. The Oracle Alicia was already seated by a low-burning fire, her milky white eyes turned toward them, though Aurelia knew she saw nothing and everything. "You speak of words and questions," Aurelia said, her patience worn thin from the journey. She knelt on the earthen floor. "I am here for an answer, the prophecy. The king must secure his reign, by the blood of his destined mate. It means he must kill me. But I have seen a vision of a traitor, a man who is twisting events to force this to happen. Is there a way to stop it? Can I change this fate?" The oracle's lips pulled back in a dry, humorless smile. You are a child playing with a dragon's tooth. Alicia's voice rustled. You come to my grove, a fugitive, a traitor, and you ask if you can change fate. You, the one whose bloodline is fate itself? Freya stepped forward. Oracle, my brother the king is fighting for her. He is trying to undo a conspiracy. We need to know the truth. The truth, Alicia scoffed, is that you are all blind. You hear blood and you think death. You are children who have only ever known war, so you see only weapons. She leaned forward, her blind gaze pinning Aurelia. The prophecy does not say by the death of his mate. It does not say by the sacrifice of his mate. It says by the blood. But what other meaning is there? Aurelia pleaded. The most powerful meaning, little seer. The meaning Caspian, in his blind ambition, has forgotten. The meaning Gideon, in his darkness, seeks to destroy. The oracle's voice dropped, becoming a resonant, powerful chant. It is not the blood spilled. It is the blood shared. It is the blood of the lineage, the blood of the legacy. It is the lifeblood of the bond itself, the most powerful magic in this realm, the union of two fated souls. Aurelia's world tilted on its axis. Lifeblood. Lineage. You mean... The prophecy was never a curse, child. It was a promise. The king's reign would be secured not by a death that would forge him, but by the one thing that could truly unite the Pax, a new generation, a child, a legacy of life. That is the blood of his destined mate that will spare the realm. The nightmare, the dagger. It wasn't a vision of fate. It was a perversion, a lie whispered by Caspian and his master, designed to make Gregory murder the very person, the very lineage, that was meant to save them all. So Aurelia's voice trembled. I have to live. You must, Alicia confirmed. But the traitor you exposed is only a pawn. His master, the one who hides behind the dark magic, is the true threat. The oracle's face suddenly tightened, her head turning as if listening to a distant scream. He knows. The web is broken, and he is coming. Her blind eyes found Aurelia's. You have your truth. It is time to stop running. Your trial is set to begin, and you, daughter of Sterling, must be present to claim your destiny. Aurelia looked at Freya, her heart a hammer. The oracle wasn't telling her to hide. She was telling her to return to her own execution. Chapter 17. The Trial of the Seer. Returning to the capital was more dangerous than fleeing it. They were fugitives, and Caspian's men would be watching every road. But Freya was royalty, and Aurelia was now armed with a truth more powerful than any sword. They rode with a grim, new purpose, slipping into the city under the cover of a merchant's caravan just after dawn. The city was buzzing. The trial of the king's traitorous mate was the only thing on anyone's lips. Aurelia didn't sneak into the castle. She didn't hide. She and Freya walked straight to the main gates of the great hall, where the tribunal was set to begin. When the guards saw her, they drew their swords. The fugitive! Seize her! I am no fugitive, Aurelia said, her voice clear and carrying, drawing the attention of the nobles and commoners gathering. I am Aurelia of House Sterling, and I am here for my trial. The guards faltered, stunned by her audacity. She walked past their lowered blades and into the hall. It was packed, a sea of hostile, jeering, and curious faces. At the front, on a raised dais, sat the council, and in the center, on the high throne, sat Gregory. His face was a mask of cold, unforgiving stone. He looked as if he hadn't slept in days. When he saw her walk in, his eyes widened almost imperceptibly, his knuckles turning white on the arm of his throne. Lord Caspian sat to his right, a picture of smug, sorrowful duty. He saw her and smiled, a predatory gleam in his eye. She had walked right back into his trap. Aurelia Sterling, Caspian announced, rising. His voice was sonorous, full of false gravity. You have spared us the trouble of a hunt. Do you come to confess your treason? I come to speak the truth, she said, her voice not wavering. The trial was a farce. Caspian presented his irrefutable evidence. He brought forth the planted map. He displayed the pouch of dark powder. He called 2 guards, their eyes shifty, their palms clearly greased, who swore on their honor they had seen Aurelia sneaking from the rookery, no doubt sending messages to the rogues. Caspian paced before the throne. The evidence is absolute. This girl, in her bitterness from her fallen house, allied herself with our enemies. She used her influence over our king to gain access to our deepest secrets. She is a spy, a traitor, and a witch. The crowd roared. Death! Traitor! He raised his hand for silence. It breaks my heart. But the prophecy, it seems it will be fulfilled after all. Not by a fated sacrifice, but by a righteous execution. He turned to Gregory. My king, the people demand justice. I ask you to do your sacred duty. Put aside any lingering fondness for this creature and cleanse the realm. I ask for the sentence of death. All eyes turned to the king. Gregory sat, his face unreadable. He had not looked at her once. He had not defended her. The bond was a screaming void between them. Was this still his plan? Or had she misread everything? He rose slowly from the throne, his great black cloak settling around him. His cold, storm-gray eyes finally met hers. Aurelia Sterling, his voice boomed, devoid of all warmth. You have heard the charges. You have seen the evidence laid against you. Have you anything to say in your defense? The hall held its breath. Caspian was smiling. Aurelia, armed with the oracle's truth, stood tall. I do. Chapter 18. The Vision for All. I have no defense, Aurelia said, her voice ringing with a sudden, startling power. For I have done nothing that requires one. I have only the truth. Lord Caspian let out a small, indulgent laugh, as if to a delusional child. The truth, my dear? And what truth is that? Aurelia ignored him. She looked past the hostile council, past the jeering crowd. She looked directly at Gregory. Lord Caspian has called me a traitor. He has shown you maps and powders and paid men. He has told you I am mad. She took a deep breath. He is a gifted storyteller, but I am a seer. He wants you to believe his lies. I will show you his truth. This is madness, Caspian snapped, his composure slipping. She is stalling. Seize her. Let her speak, Gregory commanded. His voice was flat, but his eyes, locked on Aurelia, were blazing. Before Caspian could protest again, Aurelia closed her eyes. She didn't just reach for her magic. She unleashed it. It was not a small private vision. It was a psychic storm, fueled by the oracle's revelation, her righteous fury, and the raw, undeniable power of the mate bond. She felt the magic surge, a wave of silver light invisible to all but her. She found the mental link to Caspian, the one he had forged in her nightmares, and she tore it open, reversing the flow. She didn't just project, she broadcasted. A collective gasp echoed through the hall. Everyone, the council, the guards, the crowd, Gregory and Caspian himself, was ripped from the room. They were in the moonlit forest. They saw Caspian, his hood down, his face cruel, giving the order for the Stonebrook massacre. Let 2 of them escape. They must report what they see. The rest are yours. They saw him in the castle, planting the map in her chimney. They saw him in the dungeons, his face alight with triumph, confessing his entire plan. Forge him in fire. Make him the ruthless, iron-fisted ruler we need. The vision, a torrent of irrefutable truth, lasted less than 10 seconds. It ended as abruptly as it began. The entire hall stumbled, gasping, as reality slammed back into place. Lords gripped the table, guards looked at their hands, and the crowd stared in stunned, horrified silence. They had all seen it. They had all heard it. Caspian was frozen, his face a mask of waxy disbelief. His grandfatherly facade was shattered, burned away by the truth. His eyes, wide with shock and pure, unadulterated rage, found hers. You psychic bitch, he snarled. It was all the confirmation they needed. The guards, acting on pure instinct, turned. Their swords, which had been meant for her, were now leveled directly at the king's most trusted advisor. Gregory Bastian rose from his throne. His face was no longer a mask. It was a portrait of cold, controlled, apocalyptic fury. "Lord Caspian," the king's voice was a low, terrifying growl. "It seems you have a new trial to attend." Chapter 19. The mastermind revealed chaos erupted. The council members were on their feet, shouting, "Treason!" and "Seize him!" Lord Caspian, cornered and exposed, acted with the speed of a viper. His grandfatherly demeanor vanished, replaced by the ruthless killer he truly was. He drew a long, thin dagger from beneath his robes, but he didn't lunge at Gregory. He lunged at Aurelia. "You ruined everything." He would never reach her. Gregory moved like a black-cloaked thunderbolt. He crossed the dais in a single bound, intercepting Caspian mid-lunge. It wasn't even a fight. Gregory's forearm smashed into Caspian's wrist, the sharp crack of bone echoing in the suddenly silent hall. The dagger clattered to the stone. Gregory was no longer the conflicted king. He was the alpha. He grabbed Caspian by the throat, his other hand twisting the man's broken arm behind his back. He threw the screaming traitor to the floor at the foot of the throne. "Guards!" Gregory snarled, his voice a low command that vibrated with power. "Bring the truth-teller's chair." The council gasped. The chair had not been used in a generation. It was a brutal, ancient piece of rune-carved iron, imbued with magic that ripped secrets from a person's mind. Caspian, his face pale with sweat and pain, was hauled up and strapped into it. A Pax Truthseer, an elderly woman, placed her hands on his temples. "Speak," she commanded, "and speak only truth." Gregory stood over him. "You plotted against the crown. You murdered my people. Why?" Caspian, his body convulsing against the magic, spat the words. "For the kingdom! You are weak, like your father. You needed to be forged. The prophecy demanded the sacrifice." "You were wrong," Gregory stated, his voice cold. "Who did you work with?" "Not for," Caspian choked out. "I worked with the true Alpha, the one who understands strength, the one who will restore the ancient bloodlines." "His name," Gregory commanded, the authority of the Alpha King pressing down. "Speak his name." Caspian thrashed, his throat raw. The magic was too strong. "Gideon!" he roared, the name tearing from him, a dark secret finally lanced. A wave of absolute horror rolled through the council. Gideon, a name whispered in history, a banished alpha from a rival bloodline, exiled 2 decades ago for practicing dark magic and attempting a bloody coup. He was thought to be dead. "He's alive," Gregory breathed, the final piece of the puzzle sliding into place. "The rogues. It's not just an army. It's his army." Caspian, delirious with rage and the chair's magic, began to laugh, a high, broken sound. "You think you've won, boy? You think it's over? He's been waiting. He's at the Red Summit waiting for your armies." He looked at Gregory, his eyes alight with a final desperate madness. "And your scouts, following my maps, are leading your entire legion right into his trap. They are marching as we speak." Chapter 20. The Vision of the Trap. The Great Hall was instantly converted into a war room. The energy of the trial was replaced by the cold, frantic panic of impending war. Generals unfurled maps across the great table, their faces grim. The Red Summit. It was a narrow, treacherous pass in the northern mountains, a perfect place for an ambush. "He's right," one general said, his finger jabbing the map. "Our main legion is here, scheduled to make camp at the base of the summit by nightfall. If Gideon's main force is in those hills..." He didn't need to finish. "This is Caspian's intelligence," Gregory said, his voice flat. "It's all been a lie. He's been feeding Gideon our movements for months, while feeding us this." The council was in chaos. "We must recall the legion." "There's no time. They'll be slaughtered before a raven can reach them." "We must send the capital guard. Attack from the south. Try to break the pincer." As the men argued, their voices rising, Aurelia stood by the throne, her hand on the cold stone. She felt Gregory's panic, his despair, his fury, all through the bond. She tried to focus, to push past the noise, to see. The world dissolved. It was not a gentle vision. It was a violent, painful assault. She was no longer in the hall. She was high above the red summit. She saw it all. Gregory's legions, loyal and unsuspecting, marching into the pass. She saw the glint of dark magic, the unnatural silence of the rocks. She saw the trap sprung. A rock slide, fire, a wave of 1,000 green-eyed, dark magic-controlled rogues pouring over the ridges. It was a massacre. A perfect, inescapable slaughter. But then, the vision shifted, pulled by an unseen force. It flew south, fast as a raven, away from the red summit. It flew over the lowlands, toward the capital. It stopped at a deep, jagged canyon, Shatterstone Ravine, and she saw him. Gideon. He was not at the red summit. He was here, at the ravine, with an even larger force. He was watching a single, lone scout ride hard for the capital. Aurelia's breath hitched. She understood. The red summit was the trap. But not for Gregory's army. It was a diversion. A loud, bloody sacrifice to draw every soldier Gregory had, while Gideon himself, with his true army, marched on the undefended capital. The confession Caspian had given, it was another lie. A final, brilliant misdirection. Aurelia gasped, her eyes flying open. She stumbled forward, collapsing against the war table, scattering the maps. "He's lying," she choked out. The entire room went silent. Every eye turned to her. Gregory was at her side in an instant, his hands gripping her shoulders, the first time he had willingly touched her in public. The contact was electric, a jolt of pure, solid strength. "Aurelia? What is it? What did you see?" She looked up, her silver eyes wide with the terror of her vision, meeting his storm gray ones. "Caspian's confession. It's a lie, a trap within a trap." She pointed a trembling finger at the map. "The army at the red summit. It's real, but it's a sacrifice. Gideon isn't there. He's here." She tapped the location. "Shatterstone Ravine. He's letting his army at the summit be found to draw all your forces north. He's marching on the capital. Now." Chapter 21. The Battle at Shatterstone Ravine. The war room was frozen. Aurelia's words hung in the air, a terrifying, impossible truth. The generals stared, their faces aghast. "It's a feint," one of them protested. "A guess. We cannot divert our entire legion from the red summit based on a vision." "Are you questioning your queen?" a new voice snapped. Princess Freya stood in the doorway, armed and armored. "She is not my queen yet," the general retorted. She is my mate." Gregory's voice cut through the room like a blade. All debate ceased. He stalked to the war table, his eyes never leaving Aurelia's. The public rejection, the trial, the betrayal, it all melted away, revealing the raw, unshakable truth of his trust. He swept the old maps to the floor. "You saw him, you are sure." It was not a question. It was a statement. "I am," Aurelia said, her voice solid. "The red summit is a slaughterhouse meant to bleed you. Shatterstone Ravine is the dagger aimed at the capital's heart." Gregory became the Alpha King. "General Valerius," he snapped, "take 2 companies of the Royal Guard, ride for the red summit, make noise, harass their flank, look like an army, but do not engage. It is a diversion. Your goal is to slow them and save as many of our men as you can, then fall back." "And the capital, my king?" Gregory drew his own sword, the sound of it singing in the hall. "The capital is my hunt." He turned to the remaining elite capital guard. "Gideon wants my throne? He will have to take it from my corpse. We ride for Shatterstone Ravine. We ambush the ambushers. For the crown. For the realm." A unified roar shook the hall. They rode out, a small, elite force of 200, with their king at the front. Aurelia rode beside him, Not in a prisoner's shift, but in a suit of black leather armor Freya had provided. She was no longer a victim. She was a weapon. Shatterstone Ravine was a jagged scar in the earth, a deep, narrow canyon that was the only fast approach to the capital from the south. They arrived an hour before dusk, the low-angle sun casting long, treacherous shadows. "Where?" Gregory murmured, his company of alphas fanning out, silent as ghosts, into the rocks above the gorge. Aurelia closed her eyes, reaching. The dark magic was a foul taste on her senses. It was close. It was a deep, coiled hatred, waiting to spring. They're hidden, at the mouth of the ravine, in the scree fields. They're waiting for the scout to return and tell them the capital is undefended. Gregory gave the silent hand signals. His men moved into position. They were the trap. The wait was agonizing. Then they heard it. A single horse, galloping hard. The lone scout. He passed through the ravine. And as he did, the ground itself began to move. Gideon's army rose from the earth. Rogues, cloaked in dark magic, their eyes glowing with that same sickly green. And at their head, a giant of a man in black iron armor, was Gideon. "Now," Gregory said. The first volley of arrows rained down from the cliffs. Boulders prepared by Gregory's men crashed into the canyon, sealing the rogues in. Gideon looked up, his face a mask of pure rage. He hadn't been expecting this. "Bastion!" he roared. "Gideon!" Gregory roared back, leading the charge down the slope. The battle was joined. It was a clash of steel, claw, and dark magic. Gregory was a whirlwind of black steel, his alpha power a physical aura that bolstered his men. But Gideon's rogues were not normal wolves. They felt no pain. They only obeyed. Aurelia stood on the ridge, her eyes closed. Not a warrior, but a psychic beacon. She focused, finding the threads of dark magic that animated the rogues. She began to cut them, one by one. Rogues would suddenly stop, howl in confusion, and turn on their own. Gregory saw her, a beacon of power on the cliff. He was winning. He carved a path toward Gideon, his eyes set on the usurper. He never saw the other threat. On the opposite ridge, a figure scrambled from the shadows. Lord Caspian. He had escaped the dungeons and the chaos of the army's deployment. He was bleeding, broken, but his face was a mask of insane purpose. He lifted a crossbow, aiming not at Aurelia, but at Gregory's unprotected back. Chapter 22. The Wolfsbane Bolt. The battle was a cacophony of rage and magic. Gregory was a force of nature, his blade singing as he fought his way toward Gideon. He was fueled by the bond, by the righteous fury of a king betrayed. He was an alpha in his prime, and Gideon, though powerful, was struggling to hold his ground while also maintaining his army. Aurelia was his advantage. She was the key. She stood on the cliffside, a conduit of pure, silver light, her mind a razor. With every rogue she freed from Gideon's control, the tide of the battle turned further in their favor. The green-eyed monsters faltered, their dark magic-fueled strength failing, leaving them just wolves, confused, pained, and suddenly mortal. She felt the shift in the air before she saw it, a new spike of hatred, a focused, murderous intent that was not from Gideon. Her eyes snapped open. She scanned the opposite ridge, and she saw him. Caspian. He was a broken gargoyle, his arm at a sickening angle, but he had the heavy crossbow braced on the rocks. He was aiming. His target was clear. Gregory, his back exposed as he parried a blow from one of Gideon's lieutenants. Aurelia saw the calculation in Caspian's eyes. He still believed in his twisted prophecy. If he couldn't force Gregory to kill the mate, he would do it himself. No. Her vision flashed. The bolt. It wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at Gregory. She saw the fletching. It was black, soaked in a dark, oily liquid. Wolfsbane. The deadliest, most agonizing poison to their kind. It was too far to warn him. There was no time. The twang of the crossbow string cut through the din of battle. "Gregory!" she screamed. She didn't think. She ran, half leaping, half falling down the rocky incline. He was too far. The bolt was too fast. Gregory heard her scream. He turned, confused. He saw the bolt in the air, a black streak of death. He tried to raise his shield, but he was too slow. Aurelia threw herself forward. She didn't just shove him. She slammed into him with the full force of her momentum, a desperate, flying tackle that sent them both sprawling to the ground. Gregory roared in surprise, and Aurelia screamed. The bolt had missed his heart, but it had not missed her. It was embedded deep in her shoulder, just below the collarbone. The pain was immediate, a fire of pure, unadulterated agony. It was not just a puncture. It was a chemical, all-consuming burn. She gasped, her hands clawing at the wound, but her fingers were already going numb. "Aurelia!" Gregory's roar of rage turned into a cry of sheer terror. He scrambled to her, his hands hovering over the black-fletched bolt. He could see the black veins already spreading from the wound, a spiderweb of death moving toward her heart. She looked up at him, her silver eyes wide with shock and pain. It burns," she whispered. On the far ridge, Caspian saw his shot had hit the wrong target. But as he watched the poison spread, he began to laugh, a high, broken sound of triumph. He had still fulfilled the prophecy. The mate was dying. Gregory looked at her, at the spreading poison, and he knew. He had minutes, perhaps only seconds. Chapter 23. The Bond of Healing. The world narrowed to the single agonizing point of the wolfsbane. Gregory cradled Aurelia, his armor stained with her blood. The battle raged around them. Gideon was pressing his advantage. Freya was screaming orders, but they were in the eye of the storm. "No," Gregory whispered, his voice a broken growl. "I did not find you just to lose you. I will not let this happen." He remembered the oracle's words, the blood of his destined mate. Not death blood, life blood, the lineage, the bond itself. It was never a curse. It was the cure. "Heal," he commanded, his voice low. Nothing happened. The poison spread, her breathing becoming a shallow, wet gasp. Caspian's laughter echoed from the ridge. Gregory's desperation turned to a primal, alpha rage. This was not a request. It was a command. He placed his hand over the wound, ignoring the searing, corrosive burn of the wolfsbane. He closed his eyes. He didn't just push his magic. He pulled on the mate bond, that living divine thread that connected their souls. "You are my mate, Aurelia Sterling," he roared, his voice booming with an ancient alpha authority that made the very rocks tremble. "Your life is mine. Your blood is mine, and I command you to live." It was not a healing. It was an exorcism. He poured his own life force, his vitality, his pure alpha magic, and the fated white-hot energy of the bond itself into her body. The wolfsbane, a thing of dark magic and death, could not coexist with the raw, divine magic of life. Aurelia screamed as the power flooded her. It was a fire, fighting a fire. The black veins on her skin sizzled, smoked, and then began to recede. The poison was being burned away, purified. Gregory ripped the bolt from her shoulder and watched, in awestruck wonder, as the wound pulled itself closed, leaving only clean new skin. Aurelia gasped, a deep, shuddering intake of pure air. Her eyes flew open. The silver irises were no longer just silver. They were glowing, shot through with the same stormy gray of his. She was healed. He pulled her to her feet. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They were no longer two halves. They were one. They turned, united, and faced the battle. Aurelia raised her hand. She was no longer just cutting threads. She could see the source. She saw Gideon, his dark aura pulsing. She saw the river of dark magic that flowed from him into his army. She clenched her fist and shattered it. The entire rogue army collapsed. Hundreds of wolves, howling in pain and confusion, as the green light in their eyes vanished. The dark magic was gone, leaving them mortal. Gideon staggered, clutching his head, a scream of rage tearing from his throat. His power was broken. He looked up just in time to see Gregory leaping at him. If Gregory was a storm before, he was a hurricane now. His mate had almost died. His kingdom had been threatened. His rage was righteous. The fight between the two alphas was not a duel. It was an execution. Gregory was faster, stronger, his every move precise. He disarmed Gideon, broke his arm, and slammed him to the ground, his claws extended, resting just above the usurper's throat. The surviving rogues whimpered and bowed. The Capitol Guard cheered. The battle was over. The sun was rising. Chapter 24. The Fated Queen. 6 months later, the Great Hall was unrecognizable. The dark, heavy tapestries of war had been replaced with banners of silver and gold, the colors of House Bastion and the risen House Sterling. The room was packed, not with hostile lords, but with the leaders of every pack in the realm, their faces filled with hope. This was not a trial. It was a coronation. Aurelia stood on the dais, not in leather armor, but in a gown of midnight blue. Gregory, his own crown on his head, stood before her. He held the delicate silver crown of the queen. "Aurelia of House Sterling," he said, his voice, so often a commander's growl, now thick with an emotion all could hear. "You were the seer who saw the truth, the ally who exposed the shadow, the warrior who saved her king, and the mate who saved his soul." He placed the crown on her head. "I name you Aurelia Bastion, queen of all packs, my queen, my mate, my life." He kissed her, and the hall erupted in a cheer that shook the very foundations of the castle. Their reign was a new dawn. The kingdom, so long ruled by the fear of a misinterpreted prophecy, was now guided by compassion and truth. Gideon and Caspian were in the deepest, magic-proof cells, their dark magic broken. Princess Freya, now head of the new council, helped implement the new policies. The surviving rogues, freed from Gideon's control, were not executed. They were given a choice: join a rehabilitation program overseen by pack elders or be exiled to the wastelands. Most chose to be healed. Aurelia, now embraced for her gift, used her visions openly. She foresaw a crop blight, allowing the kingdom to diversify its stores and prevent a famine. She identified the location of a collapsing mountain pass, saving a village. She was not a curse. She was a blessing. One night, months later, Gregory entered their solar. He was weary from a long council meeting, but his face softened as he saw her. She was standing by the large open window, looking out over the peaceful, moonlit capital. He came up behind her, sliding his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. His large hands came to rest on her stomach. It was no longer flat, but gently, beautifully rounded. "The kingdom is secure," he whispered, his lips brushing her temple. "Yes," she whispered back, covering his hands with her own. "The prophecy," he began, his voice thick, "is fulfilled," she finished. She turned in his arms, her silver eyes glowing with love, and looked up at him. "The blood of his destined mate. It was never about death, my love." She placed his hand firmly on the curve of her stomach, where their child, their legacy, grew. It was always about life. Gregory bent his head and kissed her, a long, slow kiss of profound peace. They had been fated to be a tragedy, a curse to their people. But they had looked at the destiny written for them and had, with love, trust, and impossible courage, written their own.